Welcome to the Heartland Journals podcast with your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy y'all, welcome back to the show. We are focused on our nation today with always interesting person making a positive change in our community, where I interview people who are making an impact and are lovers of truth. Today we are talking with very special guest, Senator from the great state of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010 after running a successful manufacturing business in Oshkosh, Wisconsin for 30 years. From 2015 to 2021, he was chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs and remains a member of it. He currently serves as chair of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations and is also a member of the Budget, Finance, and Aging Committees. Ron was Senator was reelected to his third term in the U.S. Senate in 2022 and resides in Oshkosh with his wife, Jane. They have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Hello, how are you today, Senator, sir?
I'm doing well, Steve. How about yourself?
I am doing great, and I'm very excited to have you on here. Let's roll. I know you got a busy schedule. Before running for Senate, you were a very successful, I'd like to compliment you and say wealthy businessman. Manufacturing is labor, energy, commodity prices, transportation, healthcare, of course. So inflation would have taken a bite, but not in 2010 as much. What made you give it up and decide to work in D.C.? And you seem to be the only one with real-world business acumen. Do you find it frustrating day in and day out explaining to your peers in the Senate supply and demand?
Enormously frustrating. I always frequently mention nobody can out-frustrate me. But, my background is in accounting. It's my education. Got the opportunity to join a manufacturing company and through different, we sold it to a British company. I bought it back, eventually became the sole owner. But what brought me into politics was our first child, our daughter Carrie, was born with a very serious congenital heart defect. Transposition of the great artery. So her aorta and pulmonary artery were reversed. So first day of life, dedicated doctor, pediatric cardiologist came in at 1:30 in the morning, did a balloon septostomy, a procedure that saved her life. 8 months later, when her heart was the size of a small plum, they completely rebaffled the upper chamber of her heart. So she's 42 years old today. Okay. She's a nurse practitioner herself, does all kinds of things, has 2 wonderful children, my 2 grandchildren through surrogacy. But when I heard President Obama in 2010 trying to sell his Obamacare, denigrate doctors, saying that they'll take out a set of tonsils or amputate your foot because they're greedy, make a few extra bucks, I found that unbelievably offensive. I was asked to give a speech at a Tea Party. I sprang out of the Tea Party. I still view myself more Tea Party than Republican. But they wanted me to speak to the harmful impact of government regulation on business. Could have talked all day long on that, but instead I told the story of my daughter and how outrageous it was for the President of the United States to be denigrating doctors. And I knew Obamacare wouldn't work. It hasn't. It's dramatically driven up the cost of private insurance for people on the individual market. It's done a lot of other damage to our healthcare system, but it's silent damage because the proponents of it, including the media, they won't really talk about it. But that's really what got me involved in politics after I gave that speech. People came up to me and say, "Hey, why don't you run for office?" And my response always was, because I'm not crazy. But I guess I was proven wrong. I am crazy. So I ran for office. This was during the whole Tea Party movement, business person. Let's face it, the whole Obamacare thing certainly concerned a lot of people. And that's really what won me that election, and then ran 2 more times.
And an accountant, you must be pulling your hair out with this almost $40 trillion of debt by the time we hang up the phone today. Do you see folks across the aisle, Cory Booker, Kamala was there, Chuck Schumer, Dick Durbin, Dick Blumenthal, any Democrats at all, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, that's 7 fierce partisans out of 50 right there. Any willing to work on bipartisan legislation with you, like reduce that debt, stop that spending?
Well, I'm actually working with no labels. There's a group of House Democrats. Eventually, we'll probably expand it if successful. Right now, we're just trying to focus on the areas of agreement. I wrote a 30-page report on the One Big Beautiful Bill in terms of what we need to do to begin to start bending the deficit curve down. We didn't do that successfully. So because I've kind of laid out the groundwork. Now we're just trying to get the numbers right, kind of lay out, okay, what do we need to do? And listen, I'll work with anybody who's willing to admit we have the problem, properly define it, work toward areas of agreement. But the first thing to do is you have to agree in the numbers. And there aren't very many people here that like to even look at numbers, much less take a look at the current situation. They'd rather whistle by the graveyard. So it's pretty few and far between. That's the sad reality. People like me who are concerned about the deficit, who want to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending, we are vastly outnumbered, but we're also outnumbered within the American population. I mean, Americans love getting free things from the federal government, right? I mean, everybody loves their benefit. They're willing to listen or think that, well, somebody else will pay for it. Sad fact is that's not true. It doesn't work. So you'd have more people in Congress who are concerned about the debt and deficit if we had the public pressure to do so, but that public pressure just doesn't exist.
And it's not the Senate's job. I know you're the only one out there who can do it and can add up 1 and 1 is 2, but it's the Congress's job. Do you ever wonder, where have we strayed so far? Why do we have this 17th Amendment? Why do we have to be beholden, not you personally, but beholden to the lobbyists and the voters when we are senators? That's not the way it was supposed to be.
Well, I think I've often heard it that show me a member of Congress who ever lost because they spent too much money. FDR kind of plowed the ground here, right? In 1930, the federal government consumed about 3.5% of our GDP. Back then, state and local governments were spending about 9.1%. That was really the foundational premise of this country. Most government, close to government, where it's more efficient, more effective, more accountable. The federal government only doing what was enumerated for it to do in the Constitution. That's what the whole 10th Amendment is weirdly worded as it is. That's basically what it says. Most governing at the states, the federal government only doing what's enumerated in the Constitution, and all the power really resides with the people. Well, FDR learned how to turn the federal fisc into basically buying votes. Did it very successfully. So by the beginning of World War II, after a decade of the New Deal, federal government went from 3.5% to about 11.7%. During the war, we actually hit 41%, but we had responsible leadership back then, realized we couldn't maintain spending at wartime levels, so they went down back to lower than pre-war levels, 11.4%. That didn't happen during the pandemic. We started out in 2019 spending $4.4 trillion, massive uniparty deficit spending in 2020, $6.5 trillion. Now we're spending $7. We never look back. We went from average deficits about $800 billion prior to COVID to now pretty well ingrained 1.9. And over the next 10 years, we're projected to have $26.4 trillion of total deficit. So it's averaging $2.6 trillion a year.
Ugh, not sustainable. So I'm glad you went back to the wartime era, because you happen to be there during the COVID era and the J6 era, one under Trump and one under Biden, but also Obama and a lot of Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell's leadership. Did you see a lot of bipartisanship in your now 15 years to get real things, important things done, or is it as angry and nasty as it looks on cable TV?
Well, first of all, Congress is a very collegial place. I mean, we're not fighting like cats and dogs. I mean, you'll hear things erupt in the media or in hearings when people are preening for the cameras. But behind the scenes, I mean, we like each other. We're collegial. We're not fighting like cats and dogs. The bipartisanship is all focused on how to spend more money. So we're very effective in a bipartisan fashion. I call it the uniparty of mortgaging our kids' future. So yeah, they get along. Now, they don't necessarily agree on the priorities. Republicans always, we want to increase defense. Democrats, we want to increase domestic spending. So they increase both. And that's the game that's been played now for decades, and why we're $37 trillion in debt. One of their more devious ways of doing this is they separate out mandatory spending from discretionary spending. Mandatory spending is way more than just Social Security, Medicare, and even Medicaid. We've got now $1 trillion a year of what they term other mandatory spending. It used to be discretionary, but at some point in time, somebody waved a wand and go, oh, now that's mandatory too. And so $1 trillion, that's, and then the discretionary spending, which is about $1.7 trillion, about 25% of our $7 trillion budget, that's all we appropriate. Everything else is on automatic pilot. So about three-quarters
And if
of
we get to 40 trillion, we're going to have more than interest payments alone per year than all those line items you just talked about.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, interest is exceeding $1 trillion a year now, and it'll just keep going higher.
What are you most proud of so far in your career?
Well, I was the champion of right to try. That's a bill that's more effective just in terms of how it was named than the actual legislation, which we had to kind of pare back and skinny down so that big pharma wouldn't oppose it, and they still opposed it. But that established a right for people with terminal illness, people that don't qualify for any kind of experience, any kind of study or whatever, in terminal stage, to have access to a drug that's not fully approved by the FDA. It has saved lives, and the concept has saved lives. So I'm pretty proud of that. Other than that, I was the guy that dug my heels in the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act that noticed that we're only cutting taxes for 5% of American businesses, the big C corps. What about all the pass-through entities? What about the mom and pop, the mainstream businesses? I'm the guy that dug his heels in, took the snarly phone calls from the Oval Office, but kept my heels dug in until we treated all businesses fairly from a standpoint of the pass-throughs got a tax cut as well, so they could compete more effectively with the big. So those kind of I would say my two major accomplishments. But again, I'm the only guy basically that understood that we were completely ignoring, we were sabotaging early treatment using generic drugs during COVID. That led me into getting connected with the COVID injection injured group, that population, which then expanded into vaccine injured off the childhood schedule as well. So I'm about the only guy that is trying to open up people's eyes to the fact that COVID injection injuries are real. The people suffering from them have been ignored and abandoned for far too long. Open up people's eyes to, and kind of signed on with Bobby Kennedy through the MAHA movement. What's causing all this chronic illness? What is causing the dramatic rise in autism? We want answers. The people who are producing products that just might be culpable in all these areas, they don't want to know the root cause, but the American people do, and that's the good news.
That's right. We have so many injured and out of employment now and whatnot. Has RFK Jr. and his replacements at CDC and FDA been doing a good job draining that corner of the swamp? It's been about 8 months. And more importantly, has he been in contact with you for all the information that you've gathered in hearings over the many years now, 5 years, about the origins and not safe and not effectiveness of the vaccines? I heard about John Malone and Dr. Peter McCullough from your hearings. They've both been on this show, so thank you for that. But has RFK Jr. been doing a good job?
Listen, I'm a big supporter of RFK Jr. You can see from the Senate Finance hearing a couple of weeks ago, and then the hearing today with Susan Menares, he's working against significant headwinds. I mean, there are powerful interests that want to see him fail, that want him gone. So I give President Trump a great deal of credit, first of all, for he and Bobby setting their differences aside, focusing on an area of agreement. How do we cope with chronic illness? How do we look for the root cause of autism, honestly, with integrity? And then President Trump standing behind him to get him through a tough confirmation battle. But even today, with what Bobby has to do to root out the partisans, the people that are entrenched, the people who have been captured by big pharma, root them out of the agencies. Have to put up with all of the bad publicity, all of the public pressure from members of Congress who are pretty well part of the whole COVID cartel and the capture of big pharma as well. And they're weathering the storm. I think Bobby did a great job in the Senate Finance hearing. I think they're sticking to it. So I know a lot of people don't think he's gone far enough, fast enough, but they have to understand what he's up against.
Oh yeah, and he ran the gauntlet. His whole family came out against him. All the Democrats came and disowned him. I mean, it was rough stuff. Will Pfizer and Moderna ever see liability? And do you think the Reagan era National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 might have enough votes to be repealed?
Well, Pfizer and Moderna were absolved of liability. And so, I mean, they followed the law, and they'll be, they won't experience it, other than, if we can expose absolute fraud, they might. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how effective litigating that would be. But again, the first step in accountability is exposure. That is coming. It's slow. I think I'm holding some excellent hearings here as chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee Investigation. The way the mainstream media is primarily handling that is there'll be a couple, pre-written attack pieces, then it's just being ignored. And again, that's what they've done to the vaccine injury now for decades. They've just ignored them like they don't even exist. Where one kind of pops up, they destroy those individuals. Just like they destroyed people like, the careers of Peter McCulloch and Pierre Corey and Dr. Malone. I mean, these people have paid a heavy price for just speaking what they believe to be the truth is. Being, actually engaging in science, which I would say that if there's a one-word definition of science, it's called skepticism. It's challenging what is commonly thought of, the consensus. And the consensus is probably the worst scientific or the most anti-scientific term you can come up with. I mean, science has always progressed by people pushing the envelope, what people thought they knew. The earth was flat. No, it wasn't,
Yeah, we were told literally follow the science, and they're the only ones that actually followed the science, and it led to a bad conclusion. That was the problem. They didn't want a bad conclusion. They wanted a good one. So that act from Reagan, any ideas if it's going to be there forever or maybe go away?
Again, I think as we expose things, as we expose vaccine injuries that they're real, as we expose potentially cover up by some of these pharmaceutical companies, and I think there are examples of that, if the public becomes more aware of those things, it'll create the public pressure to get that law changed. Now, all that being said, I'm not a real big fan of trial lawyers. I don't want to bankrupt pharmaceutical companies. We actually do need drug companies to develop and do R&D and hopefully research new drugs, but it's got to be honest. It's got to be science that we can count on, that has integrity, that we have confidence in. And we don't have that right now. I mean, science has been corrupted.
What are your policy goals during the Trump administration before the midterms, a little over a year from now, that may or may not see Republicans in the minority again after November? So it's possibly, now or never. What are your goals for this term?
Well, my goal was with the One Big Beautiful Bill to do a lot more toward returning or coming close to returning to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending. I laid out a number of options, going back to Clinton in 1998, Obama in 2014, Trump in 2019, leaving Social Security, Medicare, and interest untouched. Spend what you need to spend in 2025. But all those other years, actual outlays. Again, I don't think we spent too little in 1998 or 2014 or 2019. So you take those actual outlays, use the control of increasing them by inflation and population, and take a look at that as a baseline budget. If you do that, you'd go somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 trillion versus 7. So we didn't get below 7. I mean, the One Big Beautiful Bill, 1.5 trillion sounds like a lot, but over 10 years, it's only $150 billion. So barely a rounding error. So again, I found that disappointing. So my policy goal would be to do everything I can to enact additional spending reductions to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending or get close. Put ourselves on a path, at least turn the deficit curve down. Right now, it's still skyrocketing.
Bend that arc down and stop spending.
Again, using my chairmanship to uncover and expose the truth as it comes to the corruption of so many of these agencies, including the healthcare agency, give a voice to the vaccine injured, try and do everything I can to help Bobby Kennedy make the case that we have to return integrity to science. We've got to fix it. That's a big problem.
Oh, God bless you on that one. So things were rough last 4 years, 4 of your 15, and Trump gets another shot at his legacy. What would you look back on in 2028 and think made it a successful second term administration if he can accomplish it during his second 4-year terms that you want to help him with?
Well, first of all, it's astonishing how quickly he secured the border. I mean, that's really why he ran in 2016. He did it. And then Biden came in and threw it open and, made America so vulnerable to this clear and present danger. I mean, the murders, the rapes, again, the concern about national security from wide open borders. So Trump came in and, it's really remarkable how quickly he was able to secure the border. Now, we've got the big mess left on our hands. We've got millions of people here, unvetted, criminals, members of very dangerous and, unbelievably violent gangs, human traffickers, sex traffickers, drug traffickers. So, now he's trying to clean up that mess. The courts aren't helping him. The Democrats aren't helping him at all. So he's pretty well doing this on his own, his just sheer willpower. We obviously prevented a massive automatic tax increase. That's a big accomplishment. By the way, on a bipartisan basis, nobody wanted to increase taxes. Democrats, as much as they say tax the wealthy, they could have done that when they had the power. They didn't. Okay, so that we actually accomplished that against their partisan headwinds. But to me, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And spending, and that's what I think we need to concentrate on. And President Trump can make good on his promise that he made. He said, listen, I'm going to do something in the near term, something we haven't done in 24 years, balance the federal budget. I just was on the phone with him the other day, and he said, that's what I want to help you to do. I want to help you balance the budget, or at least. And again, we're not going to balance, not with $2.6 trillion average projected deficits over the next 10 years, but we can make a significant dent in it if we're focused on doing so.
Yeah, and you said spend, which means inflation, which hurts everybody. In March 2024, bipartisan 300, which is a rare word, by the way, 352 to 65 voted to ban TikTok. After Congress passed it, Senate passed it April 23rd, 79 to 18, and Biden signed it. Law of the land. President Donald Trump extended the deadline for a potential TikTok ban 4 times. This week, as we speak, they made a deal where Oracle gets 80% of TikTok's U.S. business, will be owned by American investors, including Oracle, private equity firm Silver Lake, and Andreessen Horowitz. China's ByteDance keeps 20%. What do you make of this sale versus the bipartisan law that was to actually ban it? Multiple risks associated with TikTok can make it harmful for kids, including addiction, negative impacts on mental health, exposure. Anyway, the science was proving that it's not good for you. Does that negative health effect bother you, especially in light of all the hate coming out for Charlie Kirk getting educators and employees fired from their jobs?
If you watch The Creepy Line, Social Dilemma, those are some documentaries that have been out there for years. The first thing as a parent, you'd say, I'm going to limit my child's exposure to social media, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or whatever. Now we got Discord. So no, parents have to recognize that social media could be a real danger to their child and their child's mental health. So it's got to be about parental controls. Of the issues we're facing in America, certainly the radicalization of our youth through social media, the alienation of our youth is a huge one. But in terms of TikTok as one particular entity, I think there are much greater threats than just that one social media company. Although, again, I don't disagree that social media is a real problem, but it's a problem primarily addressed by parental control. Again, once you're out of parental control, now you still have that issue. But we engage in free speech here. I'm glad there's a deal that I hope is actually effective in terms of preventing China from data mining. But let's face it, we have all kinds of entities data mining everything we do. That cat's out of the bag. That Pandora's box has been opened.
Yeah, and Microsoft was using Azure with China. I mean, it's the same stuff. You've been a huge proponent of transparency, my observation. Tell me if I'm wrong, especially with the vaccines. Sometimes, the only person, only senator for sure. I post clips of you on Mornings with Maria often because you tell it like it is. Pam Bondi, and so does she. Pam Bondi said today they'd criminally prosecute folks for posting hate online, obviously in relation to Charlie Kirk. Do you agree that's what we should do, suspend the First Amendment and make speech this or any future administration deems hateful a criminal offense like they do in the UK, arresting people for memes?
Well, Pam Bondi walk that back, and she had to. No, I mean, hate isn't a crime. It's something we ought to try within our society to try and reduce, but it's not a crime. We have free speech. And that's what made this country great is individual liberty and freedom. Now, there's a line you cross. I mean, you can't run into, for example, a theater, this classic example, and yell fire because you're endangering people. So when speech crosses the line where you're actually endangering people, where you are, directly inciting a particularly violent act. And again, I'm not exactly sure where that line is, and quite honestly, nobody knows until you try and prosecute somebody and see what a jury of people's peers would actually do. But no, I mean, in general, we put up with all kinds of vile things because we have freedom and we have freedom of speech here, and that's the way it should be. If the solution, if you're concerned about how free speech is impacting the public square, the solution is, Louis Brandeis, to paraphrase him, it isn't to censor it, it's more speech. And the good news, your podcast is one example of it. We now have an explosion of alternate media. It's not just the big three networks and PBS spewing out the propaganda of government and of the Democrat Party. Now you've got an explosion of podcasts and people listening to more than just a little snippet, even though you got X, and those are snippets too. But then a lot of those snippets have 5-minute, 10-minute, hour-long videos. So you have an explosion of information. What we need to do now as consumers of that information is try and be discerning. Don't accept things at face value, not particularly now with AI when you can start generating video and audio. It's like, what do you believe? It's a serious issue. It's a real problem that is getting very difficult for anybody to understand. Is this true or not true? Did that really happen or did it not happen?
Do you think some of the people that have been fired for saying things, even though we don't like them and they're repulsive and we may have loved Charlie Kirk and we don't want people saying nasty things like that, but they lost their job, do you think they might even have a suit against their employer for, denying their First Amendment rights to free speech online? You mentioned Discord. They actually may have planned this whole thing on Discord, which means they were talking amongst themselves, saying, not only saying bad things, but planning to do bad things.
Well, when you're employed by somebody, you've got a duty to that employer not to conduct yourself in a way that, harms that employer. And, so no, I think employers have got a pretty good latitude. As an employer myself, I always wanted at-will employment, which means I could, really terminate people for any reason, quite honestly. Obviously, if the business out is, you have a reduction in sales, you have to lay people off. I mean, that's the right of his employer. So I actually have, in a strong proponent of employer rights, but also employee rights, non-discrimination, those types of things. The world's not always black and white on these things, but no, I think the reaction to Charlie Kirk's horrific murder, his assassination by too many people on the left, is really vile. It's really sick.
It is. And we really didn't do that.
I don't really have a problem with those employees, particularly schools, teachers, people that actually influence other our children and stuff. Yeah, they shouldn't be holding those positions of responsibility if they can express those. They can think them, they can talk to them in private, but you start putting it on a public format where people see it, or you tell your students that crosses the line.
Exactly. And it doesn't represent the university or the code of conduct or the ethics of the company that you're trying to do. We just dealt with this with Cracker Barrel. Exactly right. The party in power traditionally loses seats in the midterms. I've got about 5 minutes left with you, I think. James Comer, the House Whip, thinks Republicans will pick up seats because the Democrats are so seemingly pro-crime and illegal immigration. Maybe some redistricting help, obviously, in Texas and Missouri now. Do you agree with him, or think 2027 will be back to Republican minority in House and maybe Senate?
Not much of a political pundit, quite honestly, but that being said, it's actually very surprising. I mean, the Democrats are pretty good politically, right? They just are. They've got such
they were in the old days.
They have such wacky and out of the mainstream ideas, and they still win elections. Blows me away. But their ideas are so wacky and so out of the norm with what most people believe. Now, they get away with it because the mainstream media normalizes some of this craziness, covers up for it, denies it for them. But in particular now with the Charlie Kirk assassination, I think the American people are seeing, as opposed to George Floyd, where the left reacted with that with peaceful protests that just happened to turn into hundreds of riots. They're seeing with Charlie Kirk prayer vigils. They're seeing a peaceful reaction. And they're also seeing the powerful words of Charlie Kirk that most of them who were never exposed to, they were just exposed to the vile comments and the lies about Charlie Kirk. So more Americans' eyes are being opened up to the lunacy and craziness and, quite honestly, the vile nature of so much of the left. And they're recognizing that what they've been falsely told about Republicans and people like Charlie Kirk was completely wrong. And that what Charlie Kirk represents is decency and normalcy. And that he was an evangelist of two causes. One, the principles that made this country great. The ones that we all, even on the left, at least pretend that they revere. And then his faith. And he was unabashed. And it's, he's evangelist for these things. And now he's a martyr. And now his very decent words and what he was evangelizing for, it's being amplified dramatically, not only just in this country, around the world. So I think that will have an impact. I hope and pray it has an impact, because there's one side of the political spectrum that is inciting the kind of violence that is really engaged just destruction. And there's the other side that we're not perfect, but we actually do revere the principles: freedom, free market system, the rule of law.
Yeah, if they want to counter Charlie
There's
Kirk
one side
with
that's very
Elon
serene.
Omar and Jasmine Crockett, go right ahead. They'll have a 10% approval rating. Do you think Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson, no relation except same party, are doing a good job, or are the House and Senate splintering?
They have tough jobs. I mean, they have such narrow majorities. Leader Thune, in order to pass things in the Senate, generally has got to get Democrats to agree. I mean, we're going to see what's going to happen with the continuing resolution or shutdown. Again, Democrats have the media in their back pocket, so it's pretty hard. They can be the most unreasonable or make the most unreasonable demands, and if there's a shutdown, the Republicans are going to get blamed. So again, I do not envy Speaker Johnson or Leader Thune their task. They're both good men. They're both definitely conservative. They have a tough job, and they have a tough job to make decisions where they can take a lot of pot shots from the peanut gallery. They're not perfectly, again, it's a very tough job. It's a lot easier just being one of the members and just, going ahead and voting the way you want to vote. It's a little more difficult job being a leader. So again, I like both of them. I respect them. They've got a tough job.
Okay, I got time for one more last question, or else your staff will yell at me and they'll never let you come back. Your current term ends on January 3rd, 2029, long time from now. But do you want to run again, or come back and govern Wisconsin, or what do you want to do next?
Well, I didn't want to run for the third term. No, I'm being serious. It's actually one of the reasons I conduct myself the way I conduct myself. I would rather be home. I don't. This isn't a be-all, end-all for me. I would rather be home leading a private life. The main reason I ran for a third term is, first of all, I couldn't turn my back on this country. I mean, I saw what Democrat governance was doing to it, and I know Wisconsin's a tough state to win. I said so. I was probably about the only one who could win that seat at that moment, okay? But the major reason I couldn't turn my back on the vaccine injured or the COVID injection injured. Nobody else was advocating for them. To this day, very few are. So I had developed that relationship. I saw it. I saw the pain. I saw the burden. I saw their abandonment, and I couldn't abandon them. So I had to try and run. And that's really my primary focus right now is continue to advocate for the vaccine injured, for the COVID injection injured, so that they can be seen, heard, and believed, so they can get help, so we can prevent further harm. Reduce chronic illness, reduce autism, if that's part of the problem. Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical researcher, but there are things that need to be acknowledged here. Things need to be addressed, and people who are pointing it out shouldn't be vilified. Their career shouldn't be destroyed. They need to be, again, they need to be heard and believed.
Yeah, you're the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington of my lifetime. So thank you very much. The Jimmy Stewart, I suppose. So Senator Johnson, thank you for your time. We are at the end here, so tell everyone, please, where they can see your upcoming committee hearings, and if you have anything coming up that we can look forward to on C-SPAN or online, anything.
Our Senate website's pretty easy to get to, but also on X, at Send Ron Johnson is probably where we put out most of our little snippets.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on with us. Hang on, everybody. I will be right back.
Sing a song about the heartland, the only place I feel at home. Sing about the way a good man works until the daylight's gone.
Thanks for coming back. It's that time to remind everyone to please subscribe to heartlandjournal.com. That's how we grow and keep this content free for you. Now, the Heartland Journal News. Why progressives want to destroy Christianity but spare Islam. Richard Craden, September 7th, 2025. The battle for America's soul is underway. The Christianity is in their crosshairs. In 1939, George Orwell coined the phrase Judeo-Christian ethic to include the values that form the moral foundation of Western civilization. The ethic influenced the American founders and helped shape their views on liberty, rights, and law. Post-Enlightenment philosophers have criticized the irrational aspects of religion and its role in the politics of state, but most have acknowledged the role that the Judeo-Christian ethic has served in preserving the fabric of society. Progressivism, on the other hand, is a political philosophy focused on social progressive through systemic reforms. It demands a strong central government dedicated to countering societal inequality and injustice. The progressive movement historically shares roots in Christianity and secular humanism, although in recent decades it has emphasized a reliance on science and technology and antipathy toward any expression of religion in the public square. Separation of church and state. Left-leaning, since its inception in the 19th century, progressivism has, since the 1960s, adopted misotheistic, Marxist ideology. I know what Marxist is. Its proponent has focused primarily on discrediting Christian religious practice. In the Biden administration, for example, both public and private expressions of Christianity came under attack by federal agencies despite First Amendment guarantees that Americans can practice their religion without government interference. These government transgressions are currently being reversed by the new faith-friendly Trump administration. The big question, so why does progressivism target Christianity specifically? The obvious answer is that Christianity has been the dominant religion in America since its founding, and at least until recently, most Americans continue to engage with its practice. But religious affiliation constitutes a challenge to the progressive secular state, as this state insists that there can be no greater authority than itself. The emphasis on freedom of individual within Christianity also tends to resist the enforcement conformity that is central to neo-Marxist ideology and identity politics. Progressivism is best viewed as a secular humanist civic religion that is engaged in a religious war with monotheistic faith. As Bertrand Russell opined, Marxism is in many respects an atheistic restatement of Christianity, but unlike the Christian kingdoms of God, its utopian goals can only be realized through the authority of the state. For this reason, all Marxist states are openly antagonistic to theistic religion. Cultural infiltration. Since the 1960s, Marxist ideologues, many having fled Nazi fascism in Europe, recognized that a revolution to install socialism and communism values was unlikely to succeed here in America. Instead, they envisioned a less radical evolutionary strategy aimed at infiltrating the institutions that define American culture, including its educational system, news media, entertainment industry, and corporations with Marxist ideas. But for this strategy to succeed, it would first have to transform the values of the Judeo-Christian ethic in the direction of Marxism. A document in the 1963 Congressional Record outlines the plan of Marxists to undermine America by targeting the family unit, promoting deviant sexualities, and fostering criminal behavior. This strategy was aligned with neo-Marxist postmodern philosophies being taught in universities that questioned the possibility of objective truth and viewed virtually all societal transactions through the post-colonial polarized lens of oppressors and oppressed. But in order to succeed, this strategy could not break radically with the past. Rather, it was necessary to retain those aspects of the Judeo-Christian ethic that had been established as part of the American social imaginary. Imaginary. Yeah, that's what it says.
Easy for you to say.
Social imaginary. This job is not as easy as it looks, folks. To this end, neo-Marxism adopts Judeo-Christian concerns with social justice, but ignores its focus on law. This has allowed progressivism, in its current neo-Marxist woke avatar, to stand for social justice while simultaneously attacking white privilege, nominative sexuality, law and order, and religion. Although Christianity has been the primary focus of progressive vitriol, it stands to reason that the other source of the Judeo-Christian ethic would also be a target for hostility. Following the October 7th terrorist attack in Israel, anti-Israel protests led by progressives erupted on America's college campuses and streets. Jews represent a small minority of Americans and as such do not represent a numerical challenge to progressive goals. However, loyalty to religion and the state of Israel, as well as Judaism's focus on law, elicited the age-old criticism of Jews' particularisms by Marxists. Why not Islam? Why, then, has Islam, a monotheistic religion, been spared the wrath of progressives? There are several likely reasons. First, Islam is a newcomer to the American scene and until recently had little political influence and did not constitute a noticeable resistance to progressive goals. They avoided the entire McCarthy era, for example. Second, woke progressives imagine all Muslims as oppressed people of color who have suffered at the hands of imperial governments. Moreover, radical Islam, like Marxism, seeks to undermine the Judeo-Christian tradition of the West. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Jihad against the West with the goal of restoring a theocratic caliphate has been a goal of fundamentalist Islam since its inception. Indeed, nowhere in Islamic countries have Christians or Jews ever enjoyed equitable freedom with Muslims, nor are women or the LGBTQ plus afforded equal freedoms with Muslim men, a fact that progressives assiduously avoid admitting. Although Marxists and Islamists have banded together to undermine Judeo-Christian values in the West, theirs is an uncomfortable alliance, as the atheistic Marxist state is ultimately incompatible with an Islamic caliphate. Only in Muslim countries governed by secular strongmen has an alliance with Marxism achieved even a modicum of success. Finally, one must always follow the money. In recent years, Islamic governments have provided substantial financial resources to progressive causes because they share in common the goal of transforming America. Think Iran, think Qatar, think the Muslim Brotherhood, faithful resistance. If the right to practice the Judeo-Christian tradition is to be preserved, it is incumbent upon Americans' religious leaders to recognize that the goals of progressivism are antithetical to faith and they must resist being co-opted by whatever that word was, ideology out of fear or ignorance. I don't know why I can't say this word. Misophistic. I don't know. MISOTHEISTIC. Look it up. The idea that secular humanism is salvific, here's another weird word, for the individual or for society at large has been repeatedly discredited when Marxist ideology has been put into practice. Marxist ideology, therefore, should be seen in its true light, which is as the product of a destructive impulse within the human psyche that will only be fully extinguished in the messianic future. Amen? That's for you, Steve. Okay, never mind. Dr. Richard Craden is a physician at Massachusetts General Hospital, a psychoanalyst, and professor emeritus at Harvard Medical School. He holds a postgraduate degree in comparative religion from Harvard University and lectures nationally and internationally. Dr. Craden is the recipient of the Gradiva Award for Best Paper in Psychoanalysis and the Upjohn Award for Excellence in Career Research. And as of this writing, he has not yet been fired by Harvard because they don't like what he has to say. We lost a legend in movies this week, Robert Redford. I asked my friend Howie Klausner, who wrote Reagan and Space Cowboys for one of Sundance's peers, Clint Eastwood, still with us, still making movies, for his list of favorites. Here we go. Taking notes. Breakfast at Tiffany's, Butch Cassidy, The Sting, The Way We Were, Great Waldo Pepper, The Natural, 3 Days of the Condor, All the President's Men, The Electric Horseman, The Horse Whisperer, Brubaker, The Last Castle, filmed in Tennessee State Prison, Jeremiah Johnson. I added that one because I love it and he forgot it. But like my other longtime Hollywood agent friend Greg said, no one like him. Never let his great looks get in the way of a great performance. Indicative of a glorious time in cinema. Howie also left off The Candidate, 1972. And if you've never seen that, it explains the Obama presidency perfectly only 7 years later. People alive and eligible to vote in 2009 likely didn't see it and heed the warnings, but check it out so we don't fall for that again. That is it for this episode. Thank you, Senator Ron Johnson, for reminding us what a citizen politician can look like, even in 2025, an era where I can't think of many like him. What a treat to have him on my show. And Google his stuff, man. Don't just take it at face value. Vaccines and medicine in general. Listen to what his people had to say. Might save your life or someone you love. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. See y'all next time. Peace in our time, and definitely glory to God.
In the late 1920s, a farm girl from Juneau, echoed by many others. And your oak of mighty frame, land of rivers, lakes, and valleys, land of warmth and winter snow, land of birds and beasts and humanity. Oh, Wisconsin, I love you so. Oh, Wisconsin, land of my dreams. Oh, Wisconsin, you're all I'll ever need. A little heaven here on earth could you be? Oh, Wisconsin, land of my dreams.
Heartland Journal Podcast is the media property of HeartlandJournal.com, where you can find news stories, commentary, and content serving the heartland of America. Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of the people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.